everybody, and welcome to episode 32 of Cannabis Live, coming here from the Cannabis Legal Group in Royal Oak, Michigan. I'm Craig Aronoff, along with my colleague Travis Copenhaver.
Morning.
Yeah, welcome. We're here on a day where there's been a lot of, obviously, a lot of talk in the marijuana industry with the recent change from AG Sessions revoking and rescinding the Cole Memo. We're going to talk about that at length today and give you our best feedback on that. First and foremost, we want to point out we have cannabislegalgroup.com/municipalities located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. It might be your left-hand corner, I guess. It depends on how you're seeing it. We want you to encourage you to go there for locations. As we've talked about in the past, location. In order to get a license in Michigan, you got to be in a compliant parcel. So we're doing our best and working with colleagues in the industry to kind of make that as robust as possible. Like us, share us, ask us questions. We'll do our best to answer them. I think today's going to hopefully open the dialogue and engage in a lot of conversation about what people's concerns will be with the federal government's policy change, and maybe really an overstated concern when we really look at it from the big picture perspective. We've had a great couple of weeks since the licensing began. A lot of new activity, a lot of great things coming from the state. So I guess we'll just get right into it. Tell us what happened yesterday, Travis.
Yeah, so basically yesterday morning there were some reports from people close to Attorney General Jeff Sessions that he would be making a statement in Thursday afternoon rescinding some of the previous guidance documents regarding medical marijuana policy. And he eventually did issue that memorandum, which withdrew, I believe, 5 different DOJ guidance documents that pertain to how the Department of Justice would be dealing with states that have involved licensing for medical marijuana. And effectively, some of those documents that provided some confidence to the industry, primarily what a lot of people have probably heard of as the Cole Memo, laid out like if a state's licensing procedure had these elements in it, protections for there not being diversion to black markets, protections for children's, protections from cartels and black market, organized crime, in addition to safety features and things of that nature, then it wouldn't be an enforcement priority for the Department of Justice. And effectively, what happened is those guidances were pulled back, and that's caused a lot of concern. It's definitely not a good sign from the Attorney General. But I think it is getting a lot of press right now and not necessarily being, probably being overstated, like Craig said. It's not something anyone should be happy about, but let's really dive into what it means and what we can expect moving forward.
And as we do, let's just kind of give a little bit of a brief history. I mean, it's
Sure.
easy for us to jump in, having a lot more experience in the industry and knowing more of what the Cole Memo was and how it impacted other markets through the present. It really started back in 2009. And what that was the then Deputy Attorney General, a guy named David Ogden, wrote the first report that, really laid out how investigations and prosecutions, were occurring in medical marijuana jurisdictions. And I think that for just the Cliff Notes version and the crux of it really is showing how wasteful the federal policy was and how it was using a lot of resources that could be otherwise allocated and, going after what the states were licensing. And so this was the first time and the first inclination where the federal government was saying, we're going to back off of places where states are in control of this industry.
Right, and it really was a different world back then. If you recall, in 2008, when Michigan passed the Medical Marijuana Act, we were the 16th state to participate in some sort of medical marijuana program. There are now today 29 states, and it's really a different world. I'm sure anyone who's been following cannabis over the last decade has understood that more and more states have come online. Cannabis is more and more accepted. I know back in 2008 when I voted for the Medical Marijuana Act, I had no idea what marijuana was, and now I'm an expert in marijuana. So it was really a different world, and you saw, I'm sure as we could go through here, 2011, 2013, 2014, we have what's kind of colloquially known as the Cole Memo as it evolved forward. What are some of those documents?
Well, what those did is they laid out from the then existing, the then Deputy Attorney General who came in and under Eric Holder's, administration for the Department of Justice, for the Obama administration, they went farther and they said, listen, although this is still a controlled substance and although it's still federally illegal, we know states are doing it, and we believe that it's a better use of our prosecutorial resources to not pursue federal prosecutions in state licensed industry. And so they laid out ground rules beginning in the first memo in 2011 and then again in 13 and 14 that basically outlined the way the federal government was going to keep its hands off of the industry. And it wasn't saying that it was legal. It wasn't actually saying that federal prosecutors would not pursue with their own discretion criminal conduct. What it was saying is that, you know what, if you're operating and you're licensed and you're acting within your license and you're not shown to be selling to minors and you're not dealing with the cartel and you're not in some kind of racketeering or money laundering entity, the federal government doesn't have an interest in wasting its time on you. And I think that that's like the most layperson way to describe what the Cole memo did. But what it did is it did outline certain factors such as selling to minors. And everybody knew the ground rules. Everybody knows the game, the actual rules of the game, so that if you're not selling to minors and you're otherwise licensed, you should feel comfortable that the federal government was going to leave you alone. In 2014, there was also another indication from the director of the Executive Office for U.S. Attorney General was talking about issues relating to marijuana in Indian country. We do have reservations here in Michigan. We do have, Native American and First tribes that are looking to be a part of this industry here in the state. So this memo did apply to their interests as well. And what Sessions did yesterday was effectively say that that's no longer the policy, but he didn't actually articulate a new policy.
Right.
What he said was, we're going to go back to the original policy of the prosecutors to use their prosecutorial discretion as to how their resources would apply in each of their jurisdictions. Now, if we have a zealot in one jurisdiction, maybe that is more prohibitionist versus somebody who's in a more liberal jurisdiction and okay with it, we're going to probably see some enforcement differences between the jurisdictions that I think is probably going to be the bigger problem, that uncertainty.
Right. And I think, the memos that were rescinded were never law or binding policy. But I think the reason there's so much outrage, and justifiably so, is that it sends a message about what this jurisdiction, what this administration's priorities are. There's now concern that, because there was kind of this understanding that everyone had, and that understanding has now been shaken by the rescinding of these memos, there's going to be concern about what happens next. Legally speaking, there really hasn't been much change. That's right. What you've been protected from in any of the cannabis states, remains the same. Federally, it's still a controlled substance, and federally, they still consider it illegal, regardless of your medical or in a recreational market. But there was kind of this, half measure that we were living with since 2011 through 13 through 14. As we got some of these guidance documents indicating that there was, even though we never got what we all wanted, which was a decriminalization of marijuana at the federal level, we saw steps moving forward, and this is certainly 2 steps back. Maybe not from a legal perspective, but certainly politically. And you're seeing some backlash and outrage. And it's really not really a Republican or Democratic issue. You're seeing senators and congressmen and lawmakers from cannabis states on both sides of the aisle, having issue with this being done. I mean, Jeff Sessions didn't talk to Congress or indicate he would be doing this. It kind of came out abruptly. And I think that's where a lot of this outrage and why it's become such a news story is because of the way it was done and why it might have been done. Yeah,
and he's still speaking with terms that speak to, marijuana being a gateway drug and having no medical benefit, clearly ignoring the tens of thousands of pages of literature and documentation that are supporting the idea, of course, that cannabis does have medicinal benefits, and that it's actually not a gateway, and that it's used very much as an exit strategy away from opiate uses. But, so that view of his, which is skewed, was pointed out by a number of senators yesterday in their opposition to this new policy change. The one that I thought was most striking was Cory Gardner, who's a Republican from Colorado. And you may recall during the tax debate, he was the one that, or tax, I don't know if there was a debate, was there?
Well,
the tax plan. He was the one that at first had, put in an elimination of the 280E tax in favor of the cannabis industry, and due to its $5 billion price tag, pulled it off the table at the last minute. So he's always been somebody leading the way in cannabis, and he actually asked during the pre-qualification to Jeff Sessions' appointment as Attorney General what his intent was relative to the marijuana industry, and Sessions had indicated to him at that time that their approach from the Trump administration would be to maintain the policy that had been ongoing, and leave it to states. Well, clearly this is in opposition to that statement. And so it sounds like a Republican senator who has enough pull to maybe hold up appointments for the Attorney General's positions around the country.
Flat out said he would. He said he's going to hold them up until he gets clarification on why this has happened. And it's something from an advocacy side, too, to keep in mind. I mean, originally he was a senator at the time, I believe. He was against marijuana in Colorado, but the people of his state spoke, and to his credit as a politician, regardless of your own personal political leanings, he is now defending the rights of his state. And it really shows that cannabis doesn't really fall on one side of the aisle or the other. It is one of the more unifying movements.
Yeah.
A lot of things we can be divisive about, but in a state like Colorado and Washington, you're seeing both their Democratic arm and their Republican arms kind of coming out with concerns about what's going on here. And I think one of the things we are all hoping might be some silver lining here is that this might be one of the final straws that will eventually get some sort of real movement at the federal level.
Yeah. It's one of the few bipartisan things, as Travis was indicating. It's not only looking at it from the standpoint of individual senators and representatives on both sides of the aisle that have spoken out against this policy change, but also in the past in favor of more progressive changes to the marijuana platform. And I don't mean progressive by way of, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, but progressive by movement and actually doing things that move forward with the industry. But there's no question freedom-loving patriots that want to do what they want with their land, and left-leaning liberals who want more regulation, but also the ability to use this medicine and everything. They're on the same page. And as we travel around the state, and Travis and I, as you all know, I've been doing a number of municipal presentations around the state and talking with, a variety of towns and cities and villages with a variety of different political views. And it's very commonly bipartisan. Like, I haven't been anywhere where it's like one side only, basically everywhere we've been, somebody on either side of the aisle is for it. And whatever prohibitionist view that matches Sessions, and he's really the little sliver of the politics that do have this prohibitionist view still, they're the minority of interest, and that's what we're seeing at least on the street, on the ground. And I think that translates all the way up into Congress, and hopefully that'll prove itself out over time.
Well, I think it's important to remember, too, that even in Michigan, the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act was passed by a Republican Congress and signed by a Republican governor. I mean, it's easy to think medical marijuana is a Democratic, flag, but it really isn't. Maybe it started that way, but in today's day and age, it's about a lot of things. It's about state rights. It's about, government oversight over what you can do individually. It's about, looking something that, if you don't politicize marijuana, it becomes about science. And, there's very little science to show that there's danger to marijuana. There's thousands and thousands of research documents indicating it helps a lot of people. There's anecdotal stories. Can't speak this morning. It's Friday.
Yeah.
There you go. Showing that it helps a lot of people, and that's all starting to build up into real change. And it's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. But there's going to be, for as much good news as we've had over the last several years, we're going to have to expect to get some pushback here and there. And I think this is one of those examples. This came out 3 days after the biggest recreational market in the entire country opened up in the state of California. I'm sure politically we can all look to that as, probably a political statement. This will be a developing story. It's getting a lot of backlash. I haven't seen any real support of it outside of the very narrow sliver of prohibitionists. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, and I think that that kind of brings us to, what impact will this have on Michigan? What should we worry about? Where should we be here in our state? First and foremost, there's one other federal policy that can't be ignored that will impact all of Sessions' decisions regarding prosecutorial discretion, and that is the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment. It was originally the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, and now Blumenauer, who's the current, I think he's from Oregon, is signed off and co-sponsored the new amendment. And for those that aren't aware of what this is, the federal government has a budget for the Department of Justice, so it allocates the money just like it does for the Department of Defense and Department of Education. Every department within the federal government has money allocated to it, and there's restrictions on the use of that money. And for purposes of this particular amendment, what it did is it restricted the Department of Justice's use of federal dollars to pursue and prosecute state licensed medical marijuana businesses. In essence, it took away the money to pay a witness or pay a subpoena fee or pay parking for people if they're coming in for purposes and whatever else that the government would be paying for, including maybe deputizing local officials to help do a raid or something. And so what we've seen is that there's been little enforcement in jurisdictions like California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado that have a much more mature market than ours, in large part because there's no money from the federal government to allow these prosecutors to pursue it. And then they layer in the Cole memo that dictated their policy to not waste resources on it. Well, the Blumenauer Amendment is still, or the Rohrabacher Amendment is still intact. It's intact for the next 3 weeks. Now is the time. If you're going to send a note to your Congress and complain about this change, the other thing you need to do is ask them to continue to extend the Rohrabacher Amendment. Make that permanent. If they're not going to declassify it, you can change the Controlled Substances Act or do the other, more substantive things. What they can do is continue to take money away from Sessions to increase this policy.
Correct.
And so we do have that as something to lean on. And if we're going to comment to our congressional, be it our senators or our House representatives, to say we need to have the Cole memo actually made into law and become the policy from Congress. At the same time, what we can do is say enact and continue to make permanent this Rohrabacher protection. So those combinations, as we complain to our government, and they want to hear from us, maybe not always, but it's not a bad thing. You can go right onto the federal government's website and find your congressmen and senators and let them know what you think. But that circles back to Michigan now. So we have medical marijuana in Michigan. We have new state licensed regulatory schemes. We have a department that's hiring, people, and there's going to be employees at the government level and all through the industry. We have tax base that they're going to be budgeting for. What do we expect as far as it hitting us?
Well, I honestly don't think anything changes. I mean, the target is going to be those who don't do what the state's telling them they should do. If you're the type of organization that's not following state law, and going out there and doing whatever you want, Wild West style, you're going to be the enforcement priority. If you do what the state of Michigan wants you to do, which is become a licensed entity and follow the rules, grow the way you're supposed to grow, sell the way you're supposed to sell, have protections in place as required by our state to ensure you're only providing marijuana to patients and caregivers that have the appropriate documentation, you're likely not going to be the priority. If you are out there and you're operating as a caregiver, do what you're supposed to do as a caregiver. Have your plant count and your amounts at the correct levels. If you're a patient, same way. If you're growing for yourself or if you have marijuana on you, make sure you're not over your limits. And then, if you're following state law, you're not going to be, sticking your neck out there as something they're going to want to stop or shut down. And that applies to any of our states. And again, medical marijuana, despite these guidances or not, has always been in the same situation it is today. 90% of enforcement is done by the state, primarily through local efforts. So if you're doing what the local communities, your local municipalities want, if you're doing what the state wants, it's very unlikely you're going to be the target of one of these potential federal actions in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. And what we can't do is diminish the idea that there's going to be state enforcement. There is going to be state enforcement. And if the state enforces upon you and recognizes there's a federal violation beyond whatever the state is, they might bring in the federal government in those circumstances. So follow the rules, stay compliant. There's no more definitive thing we can say in order to avoid that federal policy and concern, but in the same time to continue to act within a way that allows you to maintain and keep that license and stay protected, be it as a facility licensee or as a caregiver patient licensee.
And look at what the reactions have been from some of these other senators and congressmen. They're not going to defend you and stick their necks out for you at the federal level if you're not doing what you're supposed to at the state level. If you're in a state that has, whether it's a recreational state or a medical marijuana state, if you're following the rules, no worries. If you're following the rules and doing what that state wants you, you're the part of the state that these congresspeople, these lawmakers, are supposed to be protecting. So if you're a thorn in their side and pushing the boundaries of what those regulations require you to do, and they have a reason to not support you, they're not going to do anything if you become an issue at the federal level. Follow the rules, and you'll get your state to support you. The state wrote the rules. Do what they want you to do.
Yeah, and so there's a question regarding a local sheriff who might be anti-marijuana, and he's already claiming that he'll follow federal law and not state law. Well, a couple comments on that, because that is a common refrain that we hear. What about the county sheriff? Well, let's remind people about one thing about the framework of the MMFLA right from the get-go. The framework says that the state is going to issue a license, the state license, that will be authorized by a local municipality. Notice we didn't mention county. Mm-hmm. And my common answer to that is if they wanted the county's opinion, they would have asked for it. The state did not ask for it. This law doesn't care what the county thinks. Now, these sheriffs are obligated to follow our state constitution. That's part of that as well. They're also federally, they have to do what the federal statutes require as well. But the conflict here is that they're obligated to follow the state law. So if you get a state driver's license and they pull you over, they don't have jurisdiction to, pursue you federally. That's not their role. Their role is to pursue you under Michigan state law. Now, if there's a federal deputization, in other words, the U.S. Attorney General asks them to act on their behalf and supplement, say, the DA or the FBI's investigations, that's a different role. And that's where that money from the Rohrabacher Act doesn't actually pay them for it. And so to the extent that there might be this threat, the question is how do they actually have the ability to act upon it?
Right.
And will the federal government, even if they try to pursue federal jurisdiction, will the federal government even file suit and pursue it if there's no money to prosecute?
Right.
And so we do have this discrepancy, but it still goes back to the idea that many of these county sheriffs are going to benefit as a result of getting 5% of the excise funding gross, and then they get the unit share based upon however many licenses are in their county. They're going to do fine. 30% of the money is also going to the county administration outside of the sheriff anyway. Yep. So even the executives who might be against it are going to benefit from this. So we have to be cognizant of that and take their threats on their face now, but also remind these townships, cities, and villages they have control of what they want to do with the land in their communities. And opting in shouldn't be something where we're constantly looking over our shoulder.
All right. Another thing to keep in mind, too, from a more personal level, is nothing changed with the 2008 Medical Marijuana Act.
Right.
If you're compliant with Section 4, you have under 12 plants when you're cultivating in an enclosed lock facility. If you have less than 2.5 ounces of usable marijuana or medical equivalents, then you have a defense to any charges a local county sheriff might try to bring against you. Now, if you have 3 ounces of marijuana on you as a patient, you have too much. That's always been the law in Michigan since 2008. It continues to be so. So if you're an operator under the MMFLA, follow the rules and requirements of the MMFLA. If you're a patient or caregiver and you have marijuana in your possession, follow the rules of 2008. If you're doing those things, your local county sheriff might not like it and might love to do something about it, but if he's operating under the scope of state law, he's unfortunately SOL. There's nothing he can do. I mean, he can try to, and then that's going to backlash on him, wasting everyone's time with charges he shouldn't have been running.
No, I think that's very true. And one thing, too, about the new law versus the old and the support that we get, and this is something, again, that we talked to a lot of communities about, the MMMA left each community on its own. Mm-hmm. The old law basically said caregivers are allowed to do it. It's basically a fundamental right now. It's a constitutional right in Michigan to be allowed to grow and cultivate medical marijuana. Under that MMMA, the framework of it made it so that it was very challenging for communities to decide how to control caregivers within their community other than to kind of keep them in the residential areas and try to keep them off the grid, which many of you have done. But the new law and the new change is really a state-run apparatus. So instead of these townships being on their own on a bottom-up, kind of situation where they weren't sure if they approved it one day, if the sheriff would come in the next day and shut it down after their town did all the work and collected money, or alternatively that the state would. In today's market, and what we're seeing in the MMFLA is this is a state license. This is supported by the governor, by the AG, by the state police, by the sheriffs, and now by the local townships to have to follow the law. The law says you're licensed and you're allowed to do this. And so that's a different approach now. Now this whole government is involved in it rather than just each individual community on its own. That is a big difference, and again, that's why we think that there'll be pushback, not only here in Michigan, but every other state that's even more mature than we are, against this session's policy. I expect to see from what I've seen and read in the paper that it's very likely Washington, Oregon, California are going to sue the federal government on this and ensure that they keep their hands out of it. Maybe that lawsuit does result in a change in federal policy or Congress to act. And so this might be the impetus that kind of shoves it against the way Sessions was thinking and actually pushes it over the cliff towards the kind of rescheduling that we've all asked for and the changes in banking and all the things we wanted from it. Right. If there's another view, just to keep the glass half full view of it too, maybe Big Pharma and Big Tobacco keep their hands off for a while longer. That little extra uncertainty might be good to stay out of it while the little guys and the small operators and the mom and pops and all of our clients can get successful.
And if you look at what's happening with marijuana as a nation here, I mean, it's not going to be a smooth ride to the top. We all want it to be, but there's a lot of, hurdles we have to cross through. And this is an example of, hitting a wall and having to deal with it. It doesn't mean the industry's tanked and everything's over. Of course it doesn't. Nothing's really changed legally. It's just a statement made with someone with a significant amount of power in our government has come out against this industry, and that's no surprise to anyone. We've known since day one Attorney General Jeff Sessions hated marijuana and was a champion of the failed 80s war on drugs. Had his own personal opinions regardless of what evidence and data supported. I'm surprised it took him a year to do something like this. This could happen week one. It's certainly something we should talk about and understand the implications of. But this isn't, as much as it was issued as a surprise, I don't think anyone who's studied Jeff Sessions and his opinions on this matter are surprised that he's done this. We move forward. Again, like we talked about in Michigan, there are efforts in Michigan to continue moving forward with new marijuana laws. Supporting those, as other states have done, will only continue to show the government as a whole that the general population of our country and our state support marijuana and the decriminalization of marijuana. Whether you're a medical supporter or a recreation supporter, whether whatever your opinions are, continuing to champion the cause and while also being respectful of doing things the way you're supposed to. Regardless of how you feel about our 2008 law and our 2016 law, if you have issues with it, you shouldn't operate illegally. You should use our political system to make your issues known, and until then, live with what you have. Right. This is a new law for everybody. They've only just started accepting applications. This is going to be a learning curve for Michigan, and that should be our focus right now because Michigan is doing something new. Other states have done it in their own way. Michigan is doing it in our way. We're going to be moving forward into a new regulated medical marijuana industry, and what we need to do is support that industry. Whether you're a local municipality that wants to operate but wants to do so in an appropriate way, whether you're an operator trying to do one of these 5 licenses, we all need to be understanding of what the culture and political scenarios are surrounding marijuana. But as we all see, it's going to continue to move forward. If you compare it today to 2008, it's a completely different world. It'll probably be a completely different world in 2020. We'll just have to continue following it and making sure that, when there's moments like this, when we can have the floor to talk about marijuana and how we can improve it, that we continue to do so responsibly. And you're seeing that by a lot of our lawmakers. I've been very, very, happy with seeing the backlash that this action's created. This could have very easily been a nothing story because it really didn't change any laws or anything. But you're seeing a lot of outrage to this going on, and I think that's healthy for cannabis as a whole.
Yeah, and I agree. And we're starting to see, these Congress people pick sides and not stand in the shadows. Many of them have the opinion that this is a state right issue. Like a lot of other issues, it does belong as a state right issue. Michigan has chosen what we wish to do with it, and we are going to continue to implement this despite this rogue policy that may have been out there. And also hope that our U.S. Attorney General here, AD, locally, will deal with that the proper way. And continue to allow businesses to thrive here in Michigan without concern. Well, we talked a lot about it today. We encourage you, if you've seen this video after it was live and you have any questions, send it to us at Cannabis Legal Group. There should be links within, right from the Facebook page to ask those questions, make a comment. Travis, myself, or Barton will do our best to get back to you as soon as possible. We are helping a number of different, individuals and businesses throughout all 5 licenses pursue their dream to be in the industry today. That is going to continue. Our original plan was to talk about some of the application hurdles, like, for instance, what is a CPA attestation? What do we really need for it? And we'll look forward to bringing that to you next week. With Sessions' announcement yesterday, it kind of curtailed where we were headed. So we will, again, revisit those kind of topics beginning next week. And so until then, we'll look forward to, seeing Michigan's market grow. And for the Cannabis Legal Group, I'm Craig Aronoff.
Travis Copenhaver.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.